In this video, I'm going to take you through the 5 things that you must do in order to become the best filmmaker in the world. So I've put together these 5 criteria based on my observations of working with filmmakers and also just looking at what some of the best filmmakers out there in the world do and tracking their careers over a period of time. So let's go through them step by step so that you know what each of them are and you can focus on really trying to maximize each of them. So number 1 on the list is really having a singular vision. And this is something that I think is very specific to each project. So it's not like having a singular vision necessarily for a career, but for each project, having this singular, uncompromising vision of what it is you want to achieve and how you want to achieve it. So probably the best example that I could think of with this criteria is Werner Herzog. I think when you think of someone who has like this uncompromising vision for their project, he would have to be one of the ones that come to the forefront of the mind. And when you think about how he made the film Fitzcarraldo, if anyone's seen the documentary on the making of that film, you'll really understand what a singular vision looks like and what a singular uncompromising vision looks like. Now, whether you agree or disagree with some of the practices that he used to make that film and how intense that process would have been, the reality is that he really stuck to that vision and made sure that he was able to achieve it. Another great example of that is looking at how Coppola made Apocalypse Now. So that film was no studios wanted to finance it, which I find absolutely astonishing because he made that film after The Godfather. So The Godfather was already a huge critical and commercial success. No one wanted to finance this film, but rather than just giving up, firstly, he went and sold that film himself to all these different territories, got all these distribution guarantees, went to the bank, borrowed the money, went and shot this film. Again, if anyone knows anything about the making of that film, you can watch a doco on it. But it was so difficult to make. They had so many setbacks, but he just had this singular vision of what he wanted that film to be. And again, he was uncompromising in making that vision materialize. And just to be clear, I think there can be a difference between, having an uncompromising vision and not being collaborative or being shut off to ideas. I think those are 2 different things as well. So you don't want to mistake the 2. I think you can have this really singular vision about your film, but then be extremely open to taking new ideas and collaborating with people that can potentially make that film even better. So you don't want to confuse the 2. It's not about going out there and being a dictator and it's my way or the highway and that's it, and I'm the boss and what I say goes and that's it. I don't think it's that at all, but it is about having this very clear vision about what you want to achieve and really kind of moving mountains to make that happen, and then along the way being open to these new ideas that can actually make the film better. So that's number 1. The second one I think is having a unique style. So in the kind of business and marketing world, the way this is sometimes referred to is being in a category of one. So the idea is that if you can put your business in a category of one where you're actually not competing with anything else, right? What you're doing is so unique and so different to all the other competitors that actually no one can compete with you, then you can command higher prices and you can have this kind of almost monopoly over that category because you're the only one in it. When we think about that and apply it to filmmaking, I think it makes a lot of sense. If you can have the category of one in terms of your style as a filmmaker, then it becomes very hard for people to compete. And if they do compete, it's very obvious and they become a lame imitation of you. And probably the most obvious example of this would be Tarantino. Right? It's if you watch a Tarantino film, from the get-go, you're watching a Tarantino film. Also, if you're watching someone that's trying to rip off Tarantino, you also know that they're trying to rip off Tarantino. They're trying to do something that's Tarantino-esque. And, that's something that I think is so obvious and so clear to people that it's actually more of a turn off for that film, someone trying to imitate Tarantino's style. So, but coming up with that unique style, I think like that's the hard thing, that's the hard part of it. But the importance of it, I think, is like really, really high. And so like probably another example of this, someone like Jane Campion, I think when you watch her films, you can see that there is this very unique style about how she makes her films as well. And when you're watching them, you can also understand that you're watching one of her films. So those are two examples where I think like they really are operating in their own category. I think they're like, when you think of the best filmmakers out there, I think again, it becomes pretty obvious that you're watching one of their films from the get-go. And I think that's really important, and it's number 2 on my list. The third one is having something to say. So I think there's a real difference between filmmakers that just go out there and shoot a film, and they just want to make a film for the sake of making a film. And this is particularly in those early stages, versus filmmakers who actually have something to say, who have a perspective on a certain issue or a certain theme that they want to express through the medium. So that is something that I think, again, sets apart those really great films from just those okay or those mediocre films. Because ultimately, what we're doing is, as when we're making films, is really trying to speak through the medium, trying to convey these universal ideas or messages or themes to audiences through the art of storytelling, which is something that has been happening for thousands and thousands of years. And so I think by having that perspective, having that really clear theme in your film, and I actually prefer referring to it as a premise rather than a theme, because I think the word theme has been, like, there's so many different ideas of themes, and it can just be like, what's the big overarching theme? But I think a premise is a much more targeted way of like expressing that. And a premise is something like, so with Romeo and Juliet, it's like love conquers all, right? That's the premise. And so everything that happens in that film, like that's what's being explored. That's what Shakespeare is exploring in that work. The idea that actually love can overcome everything. It can overcome enemies and feuds and even death. So it can overcome the greatest barrier to anything, which is death. And he's explored that. Like that's what he's trying to say. And so if you can really crystallize that in a script, and I think this is where, particularly when you're starting out, it's actually quite hard to do. Sometimes it's not obvious until you've written the script and then you're going back and you're then talking about, like I've often had these conversations with filmmakers when they've already written the script. They might not be able to articulate the premise, but then once we start talking about it and uncovering it, it's actually all in there. It just hasn't been really clearly articulated. But I think when you can do that, then you're going to have a much stronger story. And some examples of filmmakers I like who do this, I think Ingmar Bergman is a really great one. I think like all of his films in some way explore the human condition. And I think like that's actually one of his greatest strengths. Another great one I would say is Andrea Arnold. I think like all her films, again, they have a point to them. They have like something to say or some sort of perspective. And probably another one is the Dardenne brothers. I think again, like you watch their films and they are exploring these themes, or like they have very clear premises. So that's number 3. The fourth one is getting the right people on the bus. And that phrase, again, is something that I took from the business world. Sorry for all the business references, but it's one of my other interests. So I try and like find, different models or ideas from these other fields and then try and apply them to filmmaking. And I think the right people on the bus is a really good one. And it comes from the book Good to Great, which is all about like how do you build companies that last over like 15, 20 years. The book was about, these publicly listed companies that have stood the test of time, or like that were really successful over a long period. And kind of like the first principle, or the first like thing that they identified that you need to do is get the right people on the bus. So before you even necessarily know what business you're going to create, if you have the right people on the bus, you can kind of work that out. And I think the same is true for film. Like, you might not necessarily even know what film you want to make, but if you go and get, one or two other core people on your team who are the right people, right? They're like as determined as you, they are talented, they have ideas, they have insights, they have life experience they can bring to the table. If you just get in a room and spend time together and you're all working towards making a film, you're going to make a film. Like, there's absolutely no doubt about it. On the flip side, if you get the wrong people on the bus, and I've had this happen to me, that can absolutely derail a project, because then what happens is you have these people on the bus who actually don't want to be on the bus. And then when it comes to doing the work that's necessary for the bus to move forward, they don't end up doing it. And ultimately the film stalls. And, if you've tried to make a short film or a feature film, I'm sure this has happened to you before. When I tried to make my first feature film, it was me and 3 other people initially. So 2 directors, 2 producers. I was one of the producers. And it just became clear over like 3 or 4 months that one of the producers just like didn't want to be there. In his view, this was taking time away from his business, and it was almost like a distraction, which is fine. Like, it is absolutely a distraction from your business and from generating an income. But if it's what you want to do, then you need to commit to that. And so ultimately, like, we just had to have that hard conversation with him and say, like, look, is it something that you want to do? Do you want to be on the bus or not? Obviously, we didn't say that to him. But, do you want to be here or not? And if you don't, it's totally okay. But like, you need to tell us, because we want to be here and we're going to keep moving. And ultimately, he quit the project. Again, that happened to me like just this year on another project where a crew member, one of the heads of department, was on this film for some time. But again, when it came to crunch time, it's just like they weren't doing the work, they weren't showing up, and that hard conversation had to happen. So if maybe you're watching this and you're actually like in this scenario right now, you've got this problem where like someone's on the bus and they kind of feels like they don't want to be on the bus. You need to have that hard conversation with them to get them off the bus and get the right people on. Because once you do have those right people on, it's so much easier for the film to happen, and it's so much easier for the film to progress, and you ultimately just have a way better experience. So when I think of like, more established filmmakers that do this, someone like Scorsese and Leo, right? Like, they're just on every bus together, because like, why wouldn't you? They work amazing together. They're 2 of the best at their craft in the world. And so they seem to just want to keep getting on the same bus. And it's just that idea, like, they've got the right people on and they attract more of the right people and they go and make these great films. Another example of like a director producer doing this would be like Ron Howard and Brian Glazer. Like, again, they're just like on the bus together and they know they want to be on the bus together. And again, they can like attract the right people. And there's so many, like, if you're watching this, you can probably think of like dozens of examples like this, whether it's director actor or like director DP, director composer. There's so many of these combinations where these filmmakers, you find your people, you find your tribe, you get them on the bus and you try and get on that bus as many times as possible together to make films. So that's number 4. And then number 5 is longevity. So I think you can have all of these first 4 things, but then if you can't do that over a long period of time, then ultimately you're probably just not going to be as successful as you could be, and you may not be the best filmmaker in the world. So you could be good, you could even be great, but you might not be like the best. And I think in order to be the best, then you do need to have some sort of longevity in your career. And 2 examples of this, like recent ones, would be Agnes Varda and Jean-Luc Godard. So like, they were both, I think like in their 80s when they passed away. They'd been at it for such a long period of time that by the time that they did pass away, they had really cemented themselves in, the Hall of Fame of filmmakers. And I think the reason is because of that longevity. Like, they were still making films in their 70s. Now, their peak period had absolutely passed, you know, probably like the time that they'll be most remembered for had passed. But I wonder, like, if they had just disappeared at the end of that period, would they have been as well known, as revered as they are now? I think part of it is because they have had that longevity. And again, you could think of other filmmakers where they just have kept at it for a long period of time. And I think working out for yourself, how do I stay in the game long enough? How do I keep a consistent cadence of output over a like 30, 40, 50 year period? I think that's something that's worth thinking about, and also worth thinking out, how do I structure a life around that? You know, how do I structure a business, an income, my family, my environment, all those things so that they can feed into having longevity over your career, so that hopefully you can get to the point where you are the best or one of the best in the world at filmmaking. So that's it for this video. Those are my 5 criteria to be the best in the world. If you liked it, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave some comments in the comments section, and let me know if you think there are other criteria. Maybe there's something more important that you think should be thrown in there. Would love to hear what you think. And that's it for this video. I'll see you on the next one.